Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you're here, feel free to say hi in the chat. Especially if you're new, as always, let us know where you're coming to us from. It's almost always a much more fun place than Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I am. But thank you for watching our stream. How these work usually is I'll solve a few problems. In fact, today I'm going to solve 5 Rosalind questions. I'll go through the solution to them one by one. If you have any questions, let us know in the chat. And then I will focus on any questions that anybody has in between problems. So we're making some really good progress. I think we have just a few more of these streams to go. And we've solved most of the problems in the bioinformatics stronghold of Rosalind, which is exciting. It's been something I've wanted to go back and do for a long time since we wrote these problems about, 13 years ago. So it was a huge labor of love to get it out to the community. It's nice to come back and just take a look at our lovely little old website here and solve some problems. So that's what we do here. We'll also get these cut down at some point in time so that if you're interested in looking at the solution for an individual question, we're going to make those like publicly searchable and easy to find. So keep an eye out for that too. Of course, we have a very busy time these days with launching our new vibe coding course as a Philomath course that's going live in 10 days. So you can join Philomath. There's a link in the description if you'd like, and that'll unlock the opportunity to take our vibe coding course and build out a studio project over the next couple of months. We're going to talk about pattern matching algorithms, data structures for pattern matching today. We're going to look at something called a TRIE, something called a suffix tree. And we're going to see how these things are helpful to us for certain types of problems. It turns out in bioinformatics, there's a lot of applications of organizing strings effectively. And depending on your particular application, you might need to organize your strings into different data structures to give you different results, because the data structure is going to essentially tell you it's going to have different strengths and weaknesses, and you need to pick the right one for the particular application that you have. What we're covering today is heavily complementary to our bioinformatics algorithms project. So there's a link to in the chat to that. If you're interested in a very deep dive into algorithms for read mapping, in particular taking a collection of sequencing reads and comparing them against a reference genome, something that millions of people have had done. Turns out that there's algorithms behind the scenes for doing that. And we cover a lot of the things that I will cover today in that book, and then some. So there's plenty in the associated chapter, I should say chapters of that book, on genome sequencing and the algorithms for doing so effectively. So I'll let you check that out if you're interested in a deeper dive. In the meantime, I'm just going to get started. We have a lot to do here. We are going to start with the TRIE problem, TRIE, and go from there. And so that's where we will begin. I have starter code as always. So in the description, you can find starter and completed code. And I have my trie.py file ready to go here. It has the particular function that I'm going to want, which is called build trie. And we have some starter code for it, or a stub, I should say, with a doc string explaining what it's going to do. So I'll get started here on that momentarily. And I think we're ready to go. So as always, if you have questions, let me know. I'll cover those between problems that we cover. And I think we're ready to get started. Let's code. All right. TRIE, or TRIE, is Introduction to Pattern Matching. There's an entire chapter on bioinformatics algorithms where we cover algorithms for pattern matching. And what that means is looking for occurrences of a collection of strings in a longer text. A lot of times when learners look at this particular problem, it doesn't seem like it's anything of particular interest. Because after all, if I was looking for the number of occurrences or the exact occurrences of a pattern in a string, I could just scan through the string and see where that pattern matches it. And then I could repeat that process for all of the patterns that I want to align against the string. So I could treat this as solving one problem independently n times, where n is the number of patterns. But there's a nice transportation analogy that I want to put in your mind, which is, imagine that the patterns are people. You need to go from point A, which is the start of the longer text, to point B, which is the end. And thinking of this as a bunch of independent searches is like sending every single individual in their own car from point A to point B. If they're all going from point A to point B, that's probably not the most efficient way of transporting them. And so the solution to this concern is to organize, in the same way that we would organize the people onto a bus or a train or something that's going from point A to point B and it's taking them collectively there. The solution is to organize all of the patterns that we might be scanning against the text into some data structure that will allow us to consult all of the patterns against the text at the same time. Our solution is going to be what's called a TRIE. Sometimes I think it has been pronounced TRIE, but there's a general term TRIE, T-R-E-E, that we've worked with already on this platform. And the word try comes from the middle of retrieval. So it has a very awkward etymology. But how the try works is to essentially thread all of the patterns that you care about into a tree. So that's what makes things even more complicated, is the underlying data structure is in fact a tree. And if we had the strings apple, apropos, banana, bandana, and orange, well, the try for this collection of patterns would look as follows. So we would have 3 nodes, or 3 edges coming from the root, each corresponding to a single unique symbol that starts off one of the patterns. Now notice, banana and bandana both start with a B. So banana and bandana will both be on paths starting with the B edge. Similarly, apropos and apple are both going to start with an A edge. And you'll notice also that banana and bandana share more than just the B. So they share an initial prefix of BAN. And so we will allow them to share those 3 edges and then branch as banana and bandana. Similarly, apple and apropos share the AP, so they will share those 2 edges. Orange is on its own, so it has a unique path from the root node to leaves. So every pattern in our data set corresponds to a path then from the root to a leaf. And if 2 patterns share a prefix, well, they're going to share the path corresponding to that prefix too. So the AP there, the BAN there. You might, of course, ask, why do we care about such a thing? Why is it useful? Well, for one, this is our bus that transports patterns along the length of a text. So if we were, for example, looking at a string that started with orange, Orange Julius is our string, and we want to search through that string for occurrences of a pattern. Well, we'd start at the first symbol, and then we could walk down and say, oh, well, we see orange is there. So we would be able to conclude that that pattern occurs in the text. If we were looking through another string where the occurrence of the pattern is inside of the text, something like crab apple, that's our longer string. Well, apple occurs in that. So what we would do is we would start at the letter C, and we would say, do any patterns start with a C? No. Then we would say, do any patterns start with an R? That's the next symbol of the text. No. Do any start with an A? Yes, but we're not able to extend that into a B. So in this way, we would eventually get to the second A in the word in the text crab apple, and we would say, well, for that A, we can start spelling out APPLE. And in that way, we would be able to conclude that this pattern occurs in the text. So what's nice about this is we make one run along the text, and in every single position, we can answer the question of not just does one pattern occur at this position, but do any patterns occur at this position? So the TRIE is a good idea. And this is a very relevant problem in the context of genome assembly, where our patterns are fragments of DNA that are taken from somebody like you. And the longer text is a reference genome of A, C's, G's, and T's that we want to consult and compare all of those patterns against. In particular, if you find an exact match of your pattern against, or your read against the reference genome, you're able to assign that read to that position in the reference genome. There's, of course, more to this problem because we're not just interested in places where you have exact matches, we're also interested in inexact matches. But that's a related question. That's a story for another day. For now, we would like to solve the problem of, if presented with a collection of input strings, we would like to produce their TRIE. And for this particular collection of strings, well, we need to be able to formulate, in a text string, how is it that that TRIE will look? So a good exercise for you would be to go through and actually draw out the TRIE of this data set. We know that we're going to have an A in one direction and a G in the other, because those are the starting positions, starting symbols in all of our strings. And in fact, along the A path, we're going to share an AT. But you can see that, well, you're going to have a GAT on one side, you're going to have an AT on the other, and then you'll branch out into an AGA and a C. And we want to be able to communicate this to Rosalind so that we express that we understand how to draw this particular tree. And the way in which we do that is to, well, we need to number all of the nodes that we have. So the nodes need to have associated numbers with them. And then if this is node 14 and this is node 17, well, we can say node 14 is connected to node 17, and the label is a P. So when you see the sample output, that explains what we're seeing here. So node 1 is going to be the root node. It's connected to node 2 with the symbol A. So that corresponds here. We also have node 1 connected to node 8, and assign the symbol G, which is what we see there, and so forth. And a lot of these interior symbols are, well, this is node 3 connected to node 4 with the letter A. So what I'm really interested in is thinking about the data structure in this way. What the sample allows me to do is to communicate that to the platform. So a lot of this parsing is going to be handled behind the scenes for us in this problem. And I'm interested really in the data structure itself and how to make it. So I will think about how I represent this TRIE then as a collection of triplets. So a bunch of 3 tuples where the elements of those tuples are, the first 2 elements are integers corresponding to the node labels that I care about. And the third element of each tuple is the symbol. So as we said, if this is 1417p, that edge is represented as 1417p. So the TRIE itself, I could establish my own user-defined class for it, but it probably makes a lot more sense for this particular problem to just have a list of tuples. The larger question I care about is, how is it that I make this data structure? And how I'll make it is, I'm going to take each pattern that I encounter, and I'm going to thread it into the TRIE symbol by symbol. So, if Apple, for example, were our current string that we're going to add, and we'd already seen apropos, how this should work is to use the first 2 edges that we see, since those are shared, and not add new edges for them. And as soon as we have a symbol that differs, start adding new nodes and new edges for those, connecting those nodes to the TRIE. Let's see then the solution. My function is going to be called build TRIE. It's going to take a collection of patterns as input, which are a list of strings. And it's going to return this list of tuples where you have the first 2 elements are the nodes that these edges connect, and the string is the label. Of course, in this particular case, the string is just going to be a character. It's just going to be one symbol. Again, the return type here doesn't exactly fit the work that we've done with phylogenetics, because in that particular case, we had a user-defined class that was a better fit for the context of phylogenetics and had a lot of additional methods and so forth associated with it that we don't really need for this particular string problem. And so that this list of tuples will give us what we need. I'm also going to preserve one-based indexing for this problem. In a lot of our other problems that you may have seen, we've worked with zero-based indexing, but for this particular problem, I'm going to do it with one-based indexing just to match the platform so I don't have to constantly go back and forth with parsing and changing in the output, zeros to ones and threes to fours and so forth. For this solution, what I want to do is, everything here is all about edges. That's how I'm going to represent the TRIE, as this collection of tuples. And I'm going to represent those edges in two ways. Globally, and as well as locally. What do I mean by that? It means if I'm at a particular node, I want very rapid access to be able to determine what are the other nodes that I'm connected to. So we're going to have a slight redundant organization of our data here, but I think it's going to be okay. So we're going to have a list of edges, and these are our tuples of int strings, and they start off as an empty list. So this is our global, and then we're also going to have a children dictionary, and this children dictionary maps integers to, in this particular case, dictionaries of strings to integers. So the integer here is this is our local collection of edges. And this maps the label of a node to, well, the other nodes that it's connected to. And we're representing this as a dictionary of the strings corresponding to the edge labels and the integers that we care about. When we start off, we know that the root node is equal to 1. So root node 1 is going to get mapped to no edges because we've not actually created that yet. So we have the local representation of our edges as children, and we have the global representation as edges. And then I'm also going to keep track of the current ID. So the next idea that I'm going to care about is 2. Okay, so this is a reference to the next node. And now we're going to apply my idea of ranging over all of the patterns and threading them into the TRIE. So I'll say for pattern, each pattern in the pattern list that I have. We're going to have another variable called current. Okay, so this is a reference to the current node. And now I need to range over the symbols. And what I want to do in ranging over the symbols is, find the place where this pattern diverges from the other elements or the other paths in the TRIE. So we need to range over all the symbols in the pattern. And now I need to say, is it in the existing path? So as I'm walking down, can I follow existing edges? So is it the case that symbol is, and here's where it's useful to use my local collection of edges. So I'm going to look at children of current. So that's my, current is our initial, or kind of the node that I'm currently looking at, which starts off equal to the root. And at every point in time, when I'm looking for a given pattern, I start at the root node and carry on downward. As I do that, I'm checking if the current symbol is in children of current. So what this is saying is range through the pattern and see, is it possible to extend the current string as we're ranging through by following edges? So we think of being at the root node as we build it out will certainly start having edges connected to it. Is it the case that when we access the current symbol, you can actually follow an edge? So this is why it's helpful when we think about how this is organized. This is the label of the node that I'm currently at, this integer. So that's where current is coming from. And then we're organizing the edges here as dictionaries of strings to integers. This is why that's helpful, because when I access children of current, that's giving me this dictionary. And what I'm asking here is symbol a key of that dictionary? Meaning, is it one of the edge labels that I care about? So this is to say that the prefix up to this point already exists in the trie, so follow it. So if I'm following it, I just want to update current to be equal to, well, look at children of current and access symbol. So it is a key of this dictionary. So if I access children of current of symbol, it's going to give me the integer here that corresponds to the next node that I want to follow. So that just corresponds to keeping walking. Otherwise, at this point in time, now the path diverges from the trie. And at this point in time, I will say, well, we want to add a new node. So the child that I care about is going to be the next ID. So the next ID references the next node that I will add. So if this is the first node that I'm adding to the tree after the root node, well, next ID is going to be 2. I want to make sure that I keep increasing or incrementing next ID as I go. So next ID is going to get plus equal to 1. This ensures we add node 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So this child then is the current node ID. And once I have set that, I will say, well, children, let's look locally, children of the current node, and go in and access the symbol of the pattern. Remember, for children, we have our current node as an integer. And then when I access that and access the symbol, that's the string that I'm assigning to the edge, but then I need to assign it the integer that I care about. And the integer that I care about in this case, of course, is just going to be child. Then I also want to say, well, I also don't have edges of that child yet. So I want to make sure that I declare children of child, but I declare it to be equal to an empty dictionary. This is an empty dictionary of strings to integers. And why? Well, because I've not actually extended that child yet and given it any edges. The final thing I probably should do is I've added an edge here. If I've added an edge locally, well, because of the redundancy, we need to add the edge globally, not globally, but globally too. And to do that, I need to say edges.append. And what am I appending? Well, remember that the edges that I care about, each one is a tuple of the 2 integers that it connects. So these are node IDs. And then the string in this particular case that labels it. So I know then that what does this connect? It connects current, that's the node that I started with, to the child, and the label is the symbol. One minor point is Python's going to want us to append this thing as a single thing, which is a tuple, so I need an extra pair of parentheses there. Then at the end of that process, I've never actually updated current. So current started as 1, but there was no point in which I carried on. And so at this point in time, I need to update it as well to say the current node that I care about is equal to the child. So this just moves down 1 node in the trie. That will allow me to, if I'm adding a string that diverges from the existing trie and 100 symbols, it will allow me to add all 100 nodes to the trie in that way. And then at the end of this process, at this point in time, I've made the trie by ranging over all the patterns and threading in all the edges, both locally and globally. And what I really care about is not the local edges. I care about the global edges, so I'll return the edges at the end of the process. We can now run this and make sure, for example, that everything is okay on our sample. So we can run Python 3 try.py. We got none. Not good. Oh, I haven't written the format. So I'll just go ahead and write the format. This I'll probably just put into the custom IO file. So you can assume that you're going to have this, but in this particular case, let's see. We have our edges and we want to format them as a string. So what I will do is, let's say lines is a list of strings, and it's going to start off as empty. And so we'll create an empty list, and then as I do this, let's return a join of those, but I want to return a join that has so it's going to be a single string, but it's also going to have new line characters in it. So after I have each line represented as its own string in this list of strings, I'm then going to join them together into a single super string, but where I'm preserving the new line symbols. And so now I just range over the edges. So when I range over the edges, it's parent, child, a symbol or label, because it's the two nodes it connects and the edge label. And when I go through the edges, I want to append to the current lines something, and the something I'm going to do is an F string, and the F string is going to be it's a parent, and then I want to make sure I have a space, and then it's a child, and then it's a symbol. So that way, when I save this and run it, I'll see the formatting, and I believe that formatting should match what I see on the platform form. So 12A, 23T, 34A, 45G, and everything there should be good. Now that I've got that, of course, I can go and download a data set. And when I download that data set, I'm going to put it into my file explorer. And I'm going to name it dataset.txt. And I'm going to take the parsing part of the code out. And then I'm going to run it again. And get an answer. So I should take that answer, and I probably should put it over back in the platform so we get credit for this. And we got it right. All right, if you have questions, let me know. Hi, Syra, thanks for joining us. Glad to have you here. Our next question, we're going to look at suffix trees, but on the platform, we have an interesting way of covering this that I probably wouldn't do these days, where we assume that you are familiar with the suffix tree first, and we give an application of it. So we actually tell you how to actually give you the edges of a suffix tree, which is, I guess, nice. And then a second problem that depends on that is to actually generate the suffix tree itself. So I will not cover them in that order. I'm going to make the suffix tree, because if we know how to make a suffix tree, I don't have to be given the suffix tree in this problem. I just could make it based off of the string. The issue is on the platform, these problems are backwards, but that's okay. I went ahead and solved both of them to unlock them. And then we're going to just go ahead and do the suffix tree problem first. So that's going to be our next one that we cover. All right. Moving on then. Rid of our maybe our next problem here is SUFF. Just getting it ready here. Figure that out. All right. SUFF is encoding suffix trees. We've already seen a TRIE, which organizes a bunch of patterns or a bunch of strings into a single data structure, so that, for example, if we were comparing many patterns against a longer text, rather than consulting each one independently, we could put all of the patterns on a bus, so to speak, or a train, and slide all those patterns along the longer string. That way, at a single position of the string, I can compare not against a single pattern, but against all patterns concurrently. The TRIE organizes all those patterns in an intelligent way so that I can sometimes be able to just look at one symbol and say there's not a single string in this huge collection of patterns that matches at this position. I also mentioned that there are potential applications of this problem with genome sequencing, where you want your patterns are collections of sequencing reads that you might capture from you. So we take a white blood cell sample from you, capture all the DNA from those white blood cells, fragment it up, and put it through a sequencer. So you now have a bunch of fragments of DNA saying, this is your genetic blueprint. This is your identity. How do we compare it against a reference? The problem is that generating all of that sequence, it's actually at this point in time, it's very plentiful. And so we can wind up with hundreds of millions of these fragments of DNA, which is good. You want a lot of sample. But then the problem becomes, well, imagine when you try to compile all of those into a single data structure, you could be looking at something that's upwards of hundreds of gigabytes of storage just to put all of your strings or all of your sequencing reads into one data structure in order to slide it against the entire reference genome. So there winds up being a major memory concern only because you were able to generate so much data, which was a good thing. But the problem becomes, well, trying to construct a TRIE containing all of those patterns is not going to be necessarily the best way to go. It is a better strategy then to organize all of the information that you want to in terms of the genome. So the genome itself, or the longer text, will be our data structure, and then we can compare individual patterns against that organized version of the text. So the idea is, yes, we are going to compare individual patterns against this data structure. However, if it's organized efficiently, we will not be consulting the entire string in order to compare one pattern against this longer text. We're instead going to be able to essentially teleport it to its exact positions if it does occur in the text and be able to find where those are. So this will prevent us having, for the human genome, you're talking about sliding a window of 3 billion to consult all of the different A's, C's, G's, and T's where a small fragment might come from. What the suffix tree will allow us to do is to identify exactly where this fragment comes from. And this is a specific instance of a much more general question of, if you have a huge number of patterns so that the TRIE doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you're consulting it against also a long string, but not maybe as long as the length of all of your patterns, how can you organize that string efficiently? So the suffix tree is also a TRIE, but what the suffix tree does is, and this is the suffix tree for this particular string, GT, CC, GAA, and so forth. What this data structure does is organizes all of the suffixes of that string into a TRIE. So there is a TRIE behind the scenes here. That is a TRIE of suffixes. And you can see these suffixes, for example, if you spell out your favorite pathway from the root to a leaf. So you'll notice a bunch of dollar signs. The dollar signs here just indicate the end of the string, so you know that you're at the end of the string. And to prevent weird things from happening, like if one suffix were a prefix of another one, well, you could actually end at an internal node, and that would be bad because we want all of our paths to end at leaves just for consistency. So I know if I hit a leaf, I know I'm at the end. But imagine, for example, that you see CCGG dollar sign. Well, CCGG is a suffix that occurs at the end of the string. CTCCGG is this suffix, and so forth. So you can pick your favorite suffix in this tree or in the string and find its path from the root to a leaf node in the suffix tree itself. There's also a lot of compression that happens here, and the reason for that compression is kind of twofold. Number one, it will prevent us from having all of these paths that are just one in, one out, one in, one out, one in, one out, that we saw with the TRIE, where each edge is only receiving a single symbol. We can compress things down quite a bit by just compressing all of those to a single edge. So when you see this edge, this particular edge is just this long path in the TRIE where everybody's been compressed down. The other thing that is nice about that is that, well, what will happen in real examples is that these strings are going to get really, really long. And if these strings get really, really long, you're back to your starting point with respect to storage, because now you have very long strings assigned to all these edges, which is going to take a lot of data. You can imagine you could have 1 billion letters along one of these edges. That would be bad. But what we actually need to do is to only represent a couple things here. If we remember what our string is, we know what the string is behind the scenes. I could access this particular piece of information, not with this long string, but by saying, well, this is the string that starts at position 1 if we're in zero-based indexing. So that starts at this T, which is the second symbol of the string, and it goes to the end. So I only really need 2 pieces of information, the starting point in the string and the length of this substring that I care about. So in the same way, this string here is G dollar sign, so it would start at this symbol and go to the end. So we'd have starting as 1, and I guess the length is 2. And a string like this, well, this GC could occur in a couple of different places. This GC actually occurs, towards, or I guess this is CG, excuse me, I'm backwards because I need to start here. So that CG occurs here, but that CG also occurs at this particular location here. So we could store both of those, or we could only store one. The point is, in order for me to know that that's CG, I only need to store one of those 2 pieces of information, which is that this occurs at position 4 and it has length 2, or position 3, I suppose, in zero-based indexing. What's nice about the suffix tree is now that if I want to, this organizes all of the substrings of the string in kind of one nice condensed form. So if I were to have my favorite pattern, like your DNA sequencing read, and I want to compare it against the suffix tree, all I have to do is try and thread that particular pattern into this suffix tree. So if I were looking for the string, I don't know, CCGAA, well, how could I do that? I could start at the root node and I could say, are there any C's that leave the root? Yes, there's a C here. And can I extend that C by following additional edges growing from that node to form out and spell out the pattern that I care about, which was CCGAA? And the answer is yes, CCGAA. And what's particularly nice about this is that we'll also add information to all the leaf nodes indicating, well, for this particular path, where does it come from in the string, in the underlying string? So this 3 is very useful because it tells me that this occurs at starting position 3. So this is a 1-based world, which is what Rosalind often adopts. But in the 1-based indexing world, we would know that that CCGAA automatically, just by looking at the leaves, occurs starting at position 3. If instead I were looking for the string CCG, what's nice about it is, well, there's actually 2 occurrences, and I can see that because when I reach this particular point, there are multiple different paths that will take me to a leaf, and those 2 paths end in positions 3 and position 11. So CCG occurs at position 3, and it occurs also at position 11. Pretty neat. So even if something occurred 100 times, you would easily be able to go through and find all of those leaf endpoints and simply understand what their labels are, and it would immediately tell you all of the occurrences of this pattern in the longer string, even if that string were huge. If you don't find such a path at all, well, then you know that the string doesn't occur in this longer string. So if we were looking for TCA, for example, we'd be able to immediately conclude that it does not occur in this string simply by starting at the root and walking out along the edge that starts with T, and to say, well, we have a T and a C, but no A. So we would be able to conclude that there is no string, no position in this longer genome that contains the pattern TCA. This is a useful data structure. As we will see, it has a huge number of applications because it's storing so much information that's very rich about the substring structure of the text. And so for that reason, the first thing we should do is make it. So we will make the suffix tree of a given string. Notice it has a $sign on the end, which is nice because, well, when we chop it up into suffixes, the $sign simply indicates the end of the string for us. And then we want to form the suffix tree. How Rosalind is going to accept this is to take the substrings of the string, which S star here is essentially just making sure that there's a $sign on the end. And so this is saying, give me the edges. What are the strings that get assigned to the edges of that particular suffix tree of this string? And you can list them in any order. Great. So what I need to do then is to make the suffix tree itself. Our idea, if we look at the suffix tree, is kind of twofold. It's that there's an invariant, which is that if you leave any node you like, the starting symbol when you leave a node is unique to each of the edges that leaves it. That makes sense. So for example, if there were anything shared when I go from here to here, if there were anything shared after the C, for example, if all of these 3 paths all carried on with a T, well, this symbol here would be a CT, or this string would be a CT. So in that way, you'll notice when we come out and form a T, every time you see a T in the string, it only occurs twice. It's always followed by CCG. So for that reason, every time I encounter a new node and I branch, the branching is that the first symbol along each of these paths is going to be different from each other. That's useful. So it implies an algorithm for making this from a string, which is that I'm going to add in all of the suffixes, and this is not going to be the fastest algorithm that we could possibly produce for this desired problem. The fastest algorithm would take probably a couple days to explain. And so we're not going to go through that. But we are going to be able to make a suffix tree in a reasonable polynomial amount of time, where we add in each subsequent suffix as we go. And for each suffix that we add, we're going to keep adding it until I no longer find a shared prefix. So it will be similar to the work that we had with our TRIE construction, although I think it's going to be a little bit more involved. And there also needs to be this clever trick applied. So one of the things that I don't want to do is start labeling all of these edges with these entire strings. That's going to blow up my memory. And so in order for that to prevent that memory from being too large, each of these edges is not going to store strings. They're going to store a collection of things. And so I'm going to represent my edges as, what is the child that we're going to be connected to? So what's the label of the node that we're connecting to? And then what is the start position of this symbol in the underlying string? And what's the length of the string that's labeling that particular edge? That way I'm just representing 3 pieces of information instead of possibly having a huge string of length like a million, right? That would be bad. So to get at this, I think we're ready to discuss a solution. And to get at this, well, it's going to be nice if we have a suffix tree class. So I have a suffix tree class for us. Which I think is here. Yes. So we have a suffix tree class, and I'll just say, it has a few attributes. It has the string that we care about. So we're always going to be able to remember what string is this the suffix tree of. That's very useful because if I have an edge that says, well, this edge has a string weight that starts at position 14 and has length 70, well, I need to be able to look that up and see it in the original string. So this original string is important. I'm also going to have an integer representing what is the label of the root. I think in our case, that's always going to be 1. And then we're also going to have the collection of edges. So in this particular case, I'm going to represent the edges as this adjacency attribute that maps integers, so these are node labels, to a list of a bunch of things. So the given node, or the parent, is going to be connected to the child, which will be the first element of the tuple. So it may be connected to multiple things, which is why it's a list of these tuples. But for a single edge that we're looking at, you have the parent is this initial integer. The child is the first element of the tuple. And the remaining 2 elements of the tuple are going to be the starting position of this edge in terms of the original string and its length. So instead of this being a string, it's a pair of integers. Mercy. All right. So we have some methods too. We have some children. We have some methods too. One is going to be to access the children of a given node. That's going to be useful. That's easy. That's just going in and grabbing the list that's associated with this particular node. And then we've got other things like, is it the case that I'm at a leaf or at an internal node? That's useful to know. Like if I'm at a leaf, I may be able to grab the particular, I don't know, the label of where this comes from in the text. And then I've got another method to give me the edge label. So this is the string that I care about. Go in and access the text. So if I've got the start and the length, go in and grab that substring that I care about. I don't want to store it, but I do want to be able to access it anytime I like. That's going to be useful for applications that we're going to see of this. And then I have the edge labels, which is to go through and actually grab all of those strings. So for each edge, to call this edge label method and get all the strings. So at the end of the process, when it comes time to hand this off to Rosalind and say, what are the edge labels of the suffix tree so that we know that we've solved the problem, that's what I need to access. So now that I understand that, well, let's solve this problem. And this problem is going to rely on a few subroutines that I have because we could put all this into one function. It's going to be quite a lot. And instead, I think it makes a lot more sense to have a high-level function called, build suffix tree that takes a string and returns a suffix tree and that uses subroutines where appropriate. So ideally, this would not be that long of a function. So let's see how I can do here. And in this particular case, what we want to do is to say, well, let's declare some variables. So the length of the text is going to be n. That'll be useful as we see. And I'm going to declare my children dictionary. So you note that remember what the suffix tree class has. It has the text, which we know already. It has the adjacency list here that maps nodes to these triples of nodes, the starting position in the text, and the length. And then it's got this root, which is just the label of the root. So we need to make our suffix tree. At the end of the day, we're going to return a suffix tree, and the text is going to be the first thing that we care about. I'm actually going to make the root node have label 0 in this particular case because it's not relevant to the problem as to what it should be, and I'm going to re-enter the world of zero-based indexing. And in the meantime, well, I declared n to be the length of text. I'm going to declare a dictionary called children, and it's going to map integers to a dictionary in a slightly different form. And the reason why is it's just from the perspective of bookkeeping, it's going to be a lot easier to work with if I change it to have the form where it's going to be a mapping of strings to tuples of ints. So we will work with this shortly, but the idea is you still are mapping nodes as integers to, other places, and this will start off as a map of 0 to nothing. So that's the root node that's getting mapped to no edges as of this moment in time. I, of course, want to insert all of the suffixes that I care about. And, I will say how this works. This maps the node to the map of the first symbol in the string to the edge. And the reason why is, remember that the first symbol, as I encounter a new node, the first symbol is what's important. I know that's going to differ. And so I don't want to store the entire edge label, but I will store the first symbol because that will allow me to very, very quickly access what is this first symbol. Like, can I extend in that direction? And then I can build based off of that. So this just gives me a little bit more information. I don't think that at the end of the day, when I return the suffix tree, I think that's information that I no longer need. And so for that reason, that's why the children dictionary I'm going to work with inside the program is going to be different from what I do in the meantime. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I will say, let's say range over all the suffixes. We're going to start with the entire string and thread them into the tree. So I have a range that says for I in range over n, I will call an insert suffix subroutine that will take the children dictionary. That's going to be important. It's going to take the text that I care about, and I want to insert the suffix starting at position I. I've called it S, I believe, in the starter code stub. So I've inserted all of the suffixes. At this point in time, I need to write that subroutine, of course, but the suffix tree is essentially made. The only thing that remains is that the suffix tree, it has attributes, the text itself, the label of the root, but also it needs to have a conversion of this dictionary into the appropriate format that is demanded by our user-defined class. So I'm going to have a method called, or a subroutine called toAdjacency that will take this dictionary and just convert it into the appropriate format that is demanded by our class. I could write that function. It's going to be our most boring function, which means I want to save it to the absolute last possible moment. Instead, what I care about is this insert suffix subroutine. So what I've done is I've simplified down this problem to say I have an existing collection of edges. It will grow over time. And at this moment in time, I want to thread just the suffix of S starting at position I into that tree and update children appropriately. So because of the pass by object reference in Python, and this is being a dictionary, I can update children within the function. I don't need to return it. I just need to find my insert suffix subroutine here. So it will walk down from the root, as the docstring says, matching the suffix against the existing edge labels. And then, well, as you encounter each node, you either have no way of extending to the next character, in which case put everything else as a new leaf and you're done. An edge matches all of the way, which would be good. So you just keep carrying on that path and go to the next internal node or node that you encounter. And then the tricky case is, well, the edge match is only part of the way. So if that's the case, I need to form a new node halfway down and branch from that particular position. So that's the challenging part of this particular function. And what we will do then is I need to keep track of where am I in the string as I go. So again, we're going to define n is equal to the length of the text. Current is going to be the index that I'm kind of, or the node label that I'm looking at. So this is starting node. And j is going to be equal to I. So the starting node is going to be the root. And j will keep track of where am I in the text. And we're also going to have a done equal to false. So this is just going to be a flag to help us know if I'm finished. Then we're going to iterate until we turn on the done light. Weird way of putting it, but while not done. What I'm interested in is the current symbol. So, look at the current or the first symbol emanating from the current node. So the symbol that I'm interested in is first, and that's equal to text of j. So that's the symbol that I'm looking at this moment in time. And remember, we have these three cases. So if first is not in children of current, you remember, children is a dictionary that maps integers, which are the labels of our nodes, to another dictionary, but the keys of those dictionary are strings. All we need to think about for now is these keys are the first symbols along each of the edges that leaves a given node. If this first symbol is not in that collection in that particular dictionary, children of current, so this is not a key, what this tells us is, at this point in time, we're in this first case. So no edge starts with the next character. And that's good. That means that our work should be pretty easy. We're going to say we need to form a leaf, and I'm going to have a new node based off of children to form a new leaf node. The leaf, that might sound complicated, it's just an integer, so it's going to get an integer label. And then I want to say the children of current, so I'm at the current node, and I want to set children of current of first. Remember, this is a symbol, so children of current is a dictionary whose keys are strings. So this is the first symbol that I care about. And now I want to map that to a tuple of int, int, int. And the int, int, int that I care about are, well, the first element of this tuple is the node, the label of the node that I'm going to connect to, which I've called leaf. Remember, I said that's going to be an integer. And then we also need the starting position in the string. Well, the starting position in the string is just j. Okay, that's where am I in the text. That's why I called it. I have that comment there. That's just j. And then the length of the string that I'm interested in is n minus j. So that's the suffix length at this point in time. Or, yeah. And, at this point in time, I need to make sure I flip on the light. So done is equal to true. I don't want to keep carrying on. So that's our easiest case. And then, if we make it here, well, we know that the current symbol plus maybe more agrees with the edges leaving a given node. Okay, and here's our remaining two cases. So we say an edge matches all the way or matches only part of the way. So we know that it matches in at least one symbol. That's all we know at this point in time. And so what I need to do is I need to go in and say how many symbols, like what is, how many symbols are there, for example, on the current edge. So what is the current edge? And I can go and grab that by saying child start length. That's the current edge that I care about. And what is that? It's look up children of current and then access its first symbol. So that first symbol is the key here. And it's going to give me a tuple of ints. And those are the child node label, the starting position in the string, and the length that I care about. Then I want to say how many symbols match. And that's another great example of where a subroutine might be helpful. So I'm going to call that the offset, and it's going to be equal to the match length of, in the text, at this starting position, if I look at position J, and I'm interested in the length that I have. Okay, so this tells me child start length are looking at the particular edge, and I'm comparing that edge against, well, the starting position at J. So this is the start and the length for this edge. I'm looking in the text, and J is telling me at this particular position of the text, I'm trying to match against it. So I have possibly two different positions of the text, J and start, and I'm comparing how many symbols from those two starting positions they actually pick up. So offset is equal to the number of symbols that the edge and the suffix agree on here. Once I know that, well, there's two possibilities. If the offset is equal to the length, okay, so this is the number of symbols that I can match, is equal to the length of the string that's assigned to this particular edge, that's good. That means I can, I've consumed the whole edge. So I can continue walking down. That's actually an easier case. It's to say update current to be equal to child and add the amount of shared symbols, which is just length or offset. So I could do it that way, or I could do it this way to J. We've now handled two of our cases, right? So the third case is the annoying case. We match some symbols of the edge, but not all. And we need to split the edge where the offset ends. So I'll say the middle position here is a new node based off children. So we just create a new node. And then I will say children of current of first is equal to. So when we made this new node, I need to connect it in. And to connect that in, I'm going to say children of current based off this first symbol is middle, start, and now the offset. So this is the amount of edges that are shared, or the number of symbols that are shared between what is currently there, this current edge that I went part way down, and the new suffix that I'm threading in. So I'm now connecting current of first to the new node that I made, and then I want to branch at that node. Okay. So what I need to say is, the tail of the old edge hangs off the node. What does that mean? It's that, well, the tail first is equal to text of start plus offset. So this is a single symbol. And so when I set children of middle, this is the first place at which they disagree. So we've started going down to the middle, and then the tail first is the single symbol where the existing path disagrees. So I'll say children of middle then of tail first is equal to, well, I'm connecting it now to the child. So this was our original child node. So I'm now kind of just splitting this existing edge into two pieces. So the middle node is kind of halfway up. So it's still going to be connected to the child, but the starting position is start plus offset, not start anymore. And the length is length minus offset because we split the edge. Then we have the rest of the current suffix becoming a new leaf. So I have a new leaf, which is leaf equals new node of children, because we've split off from here. And then once I've split off from there, I'm going to say, well, what's the start of this new suffix that I have? So the first symbol is suffix first, and it's text of J plus offset. So you notice we have start plus offset, which is where we are in the string, corresponding to the existing edge. And this is where I am for the new edge that I'm adding. So I'm still adding the offset because that's what's shared, but I'm starting in position J instead. I've got that single symbol. So this is the single symbol where not the existing path disagrees, but where the current suffix disagrees with the tree. And then once I set that, I'm going to say children of middle and of suffix first, so this is the symbol where they disagree, is equal to the new leaf node that I created. That's the label that I want to set. J plus the offset is going to be the starting position, not start plus the offset, but J plus the offset. And the length is going to be, well, how long is this particular string that I care about? And in this case, it's the length of the entire string minus the starting position where I am. So it's J plus offset. And of course, I'm going to set done equal true here. So I have done equal true at the end of this case. And regardless of whether I set it here, I'm not done here. So I carry on in this loop until I hit this particular case or I hit this case. In either of those cases, I'm done. In the other case, we're not finished. So this is just the keep on walking. That's the engine of our code. Of course, we've got other little subroutines that we need to write. So I've got match length, I've got new node. New node is dead easy, all right? I've got an existing dictionary. The only thing this is doing is creating a new node as an integer. And we're assuming that we're labeling the nodes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. So the node that I care about is just, well, length of the children, right? So existing nodes are labeled 0, 1, 2, up to the length of the children minus 1. Okay. Every time I have a node, it's in the children dictionary as a key. And that's a nice little clever trick. So then I can say, well, I've done that, but I want to say children of node is equal to an empty dictionary, just so that I make sure I set the element associated with it. And then I'm going to return that node integer. Then I have match length, which is how many characters an edge label and a suffix agree on. I have the text. I have the length associated of the string associated with the edge. This is the edge start. So with respect to the string, where is it? What is the label? What is the index where the substring occurs at this particular position? And then for the suffix that I care about, where does it start? So basically, you know, this seems like it's a suffix tree question. It's not. It's a string question. I have a text. I have two starting positions, edge start and suffix position. And I have the length associated with edge start. And then I want to say how many, you know, if we start here and we start at this position, and this is the maximum number of symbols I want to compare against, how many do they actually agree on? So it should be a pretty simple check. I'm going to set an offset equal to 0. Eventually, that's what I'm going to return. That's what we called it previously. And then I'm going to continue doing something. So while it's the case that offset is less than the length, okay, we don't want it to ever exceed the length. We're not going to match more than length symbols. And it's the case that the current symbols match. So if I look at text of edge start plus the offset, and while that's the case that that is equal to, if I look at the text and I look at suffix position plus the offset, while those two things are equal, then I want to increase the offset by 1. So I'm just going to advance, you know, one symbol at a time while we can extend the match and while the number of symbols encountered is less than the length of the allowable match. So we've written new node, we've written match length, and we've written insert suffix. The only thing that's remaining to do is, remember when we had build suffix tree, we had this nice format of the adjacency list where it maps nodes to dictionaries saying, well, the key of that dictionary is this is the symbol of the, or the first symbol on the edge. And then we also have this tuple, and it's a tuple of 3 ints. So it has the node label and then the starting position and the length. So we just need to convert this to the format that's demanded by the suffix tree data structure. And that suffix tree data structure is, if we look at data types, it says it's a list of tuples of ints, ints, ints. So we have something that's a little bit cleaner. And so we have, I guess the children are lists of tuples of ints, ints, ints. It maps nodes to tuples, lists of tuples. So this is a node, this is a node, and this is the starting position in the string, and that's the length. So we're getting rid of that first symbol, and that's all that this function is going to need to do. So to adjacency is really just a little bit of cleanup. And so it will say, make the dictionary first. I guess that makes sense. Adjacency is a dictionary of integers to lists of tuples of ints, ints, ints. And it starts off as empty. And now range over the existing children dictionary and perform the conversion. So as we do that, we're going to say for node and children. Okay, so far so good. Node is just an integer. Then we're going to say the edge list that I'm interested in is a list of tuples, ints, ints, ints. So that's the current. This is going to be the list of edges for node. And then we're going to go through and say for first, which is the first symbol in children node. Okay, call this first symbol. And I want to go in and access, I want to access children of node of first symbol. Because remember, children of node of first symbol is, we're going to say this is children of node, is this dictionary, and it maps the first symbol to the exact same thing that we care about. So I'm going to go in and grab that, and now this is what I want, and all I want to do is append that to the edge list. And once I do that for every single of our possible edges that leave the current node, then I want to set adjacency of node equal to the edge list. Okay, so now I've set that edge list for each child. Once I get to this point of the code, I've done it for every single node in the children, and I'm going to return the adjacency. And I should be done. Now, who knows if this is good, right? But if I run Python 3 of suffix.py, we're at least getting an output here. Looks good. Let's see if that's remotely close. AATG. Let's make sure I have a $sign here. That'd be a good thing to do. More on that momentarily, but AAT, it's good in some order. G $, G $, G $. Looks like they're in there. And then a $sign, yeah, there's that there. AAATG $. Good. And we could write a test for this, but it looks like we're in reasonable shape. So let's try it. Go to the platform and download a data set. And let's run it again. And we've got our output here. And hopefully those are the edges of the suffix tree. All right. Success. If you have questions, let me know. Next one's going to be LREP. Got 3 more problems today that I'm going to cover. That is by far the longest. These next 2 are kind of skiing downhill a little bit. And then we have just kind of a fun problem that's not connected to this, but the next 2 questions are going to be very connected to what we've already done. Okay. All right. LREP is finding the longest multiple repeat. Now, we've already introduced the suffix tree in a previous problem. And as a reminder, the suffix tree is essentially a TRIE. It's essentially this keyword tree where we take all of the suffixes of a string and then we organize them into this data structure where when we spell out the paths from the root node to a leaf, well, we encounter a suffix corresponding to that. So this path, AAG, and so forth corresponds to this suffix. And what's nice is that the organization of this data structure provided by the TRIE formulation allows us to see that, well, sometimes we have multiple strings that start with the same thing. So this CCG, for example, corresponds to the fact that there are 2 different suffixes that both start with CCG. There's the one that starts here and the one that starts here. More on that in this problem. Because what this problem is asking for is if we give ourselves a suffix tree, and we already know this problem is giving us the suffix tree, but we already know how to form a suffix tree from a string. So if we already have that suffix tree, how is it that we can use it to answer questions about the substring organization or the substring structure of this particular string? It turns out the suffix tree consolidates a lot of information about the suffixes of a string into one place. And the question that this problem is asking is, okay, we have a DNA string, and we want to know for another positive integer k input, what's the longest substring of S that occurs at least k times in S? So if k were 10, for example, what's the longest substring that occurs at least 10 times, including overlaps? If multiple solutions exist, the problem is going to allow us to return any one. So this question, in this case, if we were given CATA, CATAC, and the parameter equal to 2, well, there's a number of options for substrings that occur at least twice. For example, TA occurs at least twice. But if we're looking for the longest substring that occurs at least twice, well, we would get CATAC. And you'll notice there's an overlap in those occurrences. What's nice is the suffix tree will be able to handle that. But we have CATAC and we have CATAC. So those are that's the longest substring that occurs at least twice. If I give you a big string and you try to do this with brute force, your approach is going to fail because any brute force approach is not going to scale well. Yet, if we look at the suffix tree for our existing string, what we will notice, there's a key point, is what is it that these internal nodes in this suffix tree really correspond to? If we look at this node CCG, we already know the answer. Remember we said, well, that means that there's 2 different strings, in this case starting at positions 3 and 11, that start with CCG. That one and that one. So there's 2 different places in this string, 2 different suffixes that start with CCG, which means it's 2 different positions in the string that have a CCG. Pick your other favorite internal node. Okay, this internal node, for example, is an interesting one because it's saying, well, this symbol, the substring G, occurs 4 times, and we can see that there are suffixes that start with a G that occur these 4 times. Everything that starts with a T, though, always starts with TCCG. So there's 2 occurrences of T, but they also start with TCCG. So what's nice is this node tells us that there's a repeat of length 4. It's TCCG. This repeat is a repeat of length 2. This is a repeat of length 4, or of length 3, excuse me. This is a repeat of length 1. also a repeat of length 1. So the internal nodes correspond to repeats in the underlying string. And that's nice because, well, for a small string, you can answer this particular question quite easily. If we were going to say, what is if k were equal to 2, what's the longest string that occurs at least twice? Well, you're looking for over all the internal nodes. Which one corresponds to the longest substring? So in this case, it's TCCG. Even though it's only one edge away from the root, the substring associated with it is longer than any other substring that we could spell out when we get to an internal node. That's nice. So if we have the suffix tree, we can answer that question quickly. Of course, we need to answer it algorithmically, but we can answer it for this data set just by inspection, by seeing for things that occur twice. Well, TCCG is the answer. This problem takes that to the next level by saying, well, yeah, but what if we wanted to demand that the string had to occur at least 3 times or at least 10 times? If it has to occur at least 3 times, we also need to know how many edges there are or how many leaf nodes there are beneath me. So TCCG would be disqualified because there's only 2 leaf nodes on paths that end starting at this internal node. And then we'd look at other internal nodes like this internal node. This would qualify because it occurs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. That's good, but it only has length 1. This internal node would not qualify because there's only 2 paths. This internal node would not qualify because there's only 2 paths. This would not qualify. There's only 2 paths. So we're only down to 1 draw, and it would be this particular node. So this particular node corresponds to occurrences of many things, not just 3 things. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 occurrences over here and 5 occurrences over here. So actually the answer for this particular data set, if we demand that there are 3 occurrences of your repeat, is really just C or G. Those are the only options. So A occurs only twice and T occurs only twice in the string. And funnily enough, every time a C or a G occurs, you don't have 3 occurrences of something following that. So in general, the point is, how is it that I'm going to answer this question? The internal nodes correspond to repeats. That is a critical observation, but we also need to know how many leaf nodes there are beneath each of these internal nodes, which means I need to generate the suffix tree. And as I'm generating the suffix tree, I need to also know how long this substring is. So this would be 4, this would be 1, this would be 1 here, this would be 3, this would be 2, and so forth. How long is the substring that ends at that node? But then also I need to know how many leaf counts are there beneath me. So I'm doing multiple things. I'm generating the suffix tree. I'm also adding information to these internal nodes. And then after I've done all that, I then want to go to the leaves that are beneath each one of these internal nodes and pull upward the information of how many leaves there are beneath me, because I need to be above the threshold in order to count. And so over everybody that survives that step, then I say which one has the maximum length of any substring that ends at this particular position. So we're ready to move towards a solution then. Our solution is going to be called longest repeat. It will actually take the suffix tree as input. And the reason why I've done it this way is we've already written a function to produce the suffix tree. So you can do this problem in one of 2 ways. You can read in the suffix tree and parse it from the data set that the platform is giving us. Great. Or you can just read in the string and form the suffix tree on your own. At the end of the day, we're still going to have the suffix tree. And remember, we should understand what the suffix tree class is. The suffix tree class has the string associated with it. Good. Okay, that makes sense. That's the underlying string behind the scenes. It's got the label of the root node. And then it has this other adjacency list, which maps root node or node labels to all of the places they're connected to. So that's why we have a list. It could be connected to multiple things. Each edge represents the node label, what the starting position is in the string of the substring that we care about here, and then the length of that substring. Now that we appreciate that, we'll of course come back to our problem of LREP and write the function longest repeat here that takes a suffix tree as input, takes our k, which is our threshold number of occurrences that we need it to occur, and returns one answer. So we could return multiple answers. That would make this problem more robust, I think. Probably we should demand that, but in this particular case, if you find any one, then that's good enough. So the first thing we might do is, well, technically remember that there is an attribute associated with the tree called root. That's an integer that tells us what the root label is. Once we've done that, then what we want to do is we want to apply breadth first search from the root, keeping track of where we are. And to do that, I'm going to have a bunch of dictionaries. And this is, we have worked in previous problems. You may remember that we've worked with breadth first search quite a bit. And so it will not be surprising that I'm going to keep track of a lot of things as we go through the breadth first search. So I'm going to have a parent dictionary that's going to start off empty. And so this is going to store the parent nodes of the current node, which will be helpful to walk backwards. So when I'm going back up the tree, it will be really good to know it's not actually stored in the original formulation of the suffix tree. If I'm at a node, what is my parent node? So this simply maps each node to its parent node. Then I'm going to have what is the incoming edge. So I'm going to store that too. It's a dictionary mapping each node to the edge that connects it to its parent. And in that particular case, it's a tuple of two things. And that is a kind of a separate dictionary. I could combine this into one dictionary, but I like representing what's the node label of the parent, and then what's the edge label of that edge. So this will store, this starts off as empty, and this stores edges as start length. So it's the other two pieces of information on each edge. Then we're going to have a depth dictionary that maps dictionaries, maps integers to integers. And it starts off as mapping the root node to 0. And this will map each node to the num symbols from the root. Okay, so that's how far down am I. And then we have an order, which if you've seen our work with BFS before, this might not be surprising. So this is going to be the order of the nodes that we are considering. And then we have a queue, which is like the current collection of served customers. So that's an empty list, except it's going to start with the root. So the root is the first customer. And then we're going to have a head. So head is 0, and this is the pointer to the current node in the queue. So the current place that we're looking. Now, apply the BFS loop. And the BFS loop is going to carry on while it's the case that the head is less than the length of the queue. So while there's still a customer to serve, we're going to keep going through this, and we'll say that the current node I'm interested in is access the queue and look at the head. So head is the index there. Once I'm currently serving this customer, I'm going to remember the next customer. So head plus equal to 1. And so I should say, these 3 steps are access the current customer in the queue and move over. So head increases by 1, and then I want to order.append the current node that I'm looking at. So this is, I should say, this will be helpful for knowing the order of all nodes considered. And we'll see that here shortly. Then I want to say, all right, well, let's range over the children of the current node. So for child start length in tree.children of node. So each node is connected to another node having label child. This is the starting position of the edge label in the original string, and this is the length of that substring. So here's where we're going to remember some things. So as I range over all of the children of the current node, I'm exploring the tree. I want to make sure that I'm adding the information to remember, make sure to remember the parent-child relationship. It's an important one. So we're going to say parent of child is equal to node. So that's remembering the parent. We also need to remember the edge. So I'm going to say in edge of child is equal to the depth of the current node, is equal to start and length. Okay, so I just took this information and I split it out. So I'm one of the children of node, and parent of the current child is equal to node. Good. So I've taken that piece of information and represented it. And then I'm at the child and I'm remembering kind of what's the edge information above me. So that's start and length. And then I also want to know, well, how far down did I go? So how far down did I go? And that's where I'm going to say depth of the child is equal to whatever the depth of the node was, but then plus the length of this edge. Okay. It's a number of symbols total. And then hop in the queue. So this is a new child that I've found. So queue.append child. And now at this point in time, I've done the BFS. So, once I've applied this BFS loop, I've actually explored the entire tree. That's useful. And I've added in all this extra information that I didn't need to form the suffix tree, but I do need in order to answer this longest repeat question. So you might imagine then, depending on your application, perhaps you might bolster the suffix tree data structure with this extra information. And this is a classic question in data structures and algorithms of trade-offs. Like, how much information do I store? How much do I allow myself to infer with an algorithm? In this particular case, I'm not storing all this extra information because this algorithm is going to just apply a BFS to get it, which takes some time, but doesn't require me to store the information. But at this point in time, now I have done the BFS. And so remember that what we're trying to find is at each internal node, how many times does it occur? In other words, how many leaves are beneath each internal node? And if that's our question, well, we will say for, let's say actually, let's say leaf count is a dictionary and it's going to map inst to ints and it's equal to an empty dictionary. Okay, so this maps node IDs to number of leaves beneath me. Okay. And once I've done that, well, I'll say range over all of the nodes and update leaf count. So what's nice about this is, remember that I have order representing the order of nodes consulted. What's nice about that is, if order of I is less than order of J, it's not possible for J to be a parent of I. And the reason is because of how I constructed the order. It was always based off of the children of the current node. And so if I'm at a current node, I'm in the order already, and then order of J would have to occur afterwards. So that's nice. It means that when I reverse the order, I will start with leaves and move upward in the tree. So what I want to do then is to say for each node in not the order, but in the reverse of the order, I will say, is it the case that it is a leaf? I have a built-in method for doing that. If that's the case, not reverse, but reversed. If I know I'm at a leaf, well, then the leaf count at that node is equal to 1. And then otherwise, then I know I'm at an internal node, and the total is equal to 0. And for each, I'm going to range over all the children of the current node. I've already computed their leaf counts, and that's my point, is that at this point in time, if I'm encountering a current node, because I'm going backwards in the order, I know I've already encountered all of these children. So when I access this, remember tree.children of a given node contains these three things in the suffix tree. It always contains, the child index. It contains the starting position, and the length. But I don't care about either of those last two pieces of information because all I care about is accessing the child. And when I access that child node, I'll say total plus equal the leaf count of this child node. Okay. So all this is doing is when I'm going up and I'm at an internal node, it's saying sum the leaf counts of all its children. And that might be, I might be connected only to 3 leaves, in which case I'm just adding 1 plus 1 plus 1, but I might be for a huge string with lots of repeats. I might be consolidating information to say there's 40 leaf counts in this direction, there's 157 in this one, and there's 38 in this direction, and so forth. And so I want to add all of those things. So that's what the total is doing. And then at the end of that process, once I've got that, then I can set leaf count of the node equal to whatever the total is. So now I've got all that extra rich information stored at this point in time. Now each internal node has the number of occurrences assigned to it. Using leaf count. And so what I need to do then is to say, I'm looking for the deepest internal node that occurs at least k times. So if leaf count of a node is not at least k, I'm going to ignore it. And here's where I'll say, best node is equal to the root. That's our starting point. Okay. Best depth is equal to -1. This is just bookkeeping. What I want to do is range over all the nodes in the order. I could go in reverse order. It doesn't matter because, everything I need is already set. If not, let's say, one thing that would be bad is if, what I want to make sure of is 2 things. So I only care about this node if it occurs at least k times and it isn't a leaf. Okay. Now, it can only occur once at a leaf, so I probably could get away with just like if leaf count is greater than or equal to k, but let's make sure it's not a leaf either. So I need to make sure it actually is a repeat. So if not tree dot is leaf of node, and I got a little ahead of myself, it's leaf count of node, so that's a dictionary being tested as greater than or equal to k. And here's where we say now, okay, it occurs at least k times, but is its depth better than the current best known depth? So that's an easy test because I have the depth dictionary to say, what is the depth of the current node? Is that better than the current depth that I have? If so, I update the depth and the best node. So best depth gets updated to be equal to the depth of the node, and the best node gets updated to be equal to the current node. So now at this point in time, yay, I have found the node I'm looking for, but I just need to spell out what substring ends at this node. And that's where I'll rebuild this from the best node, walking to the root. So good thing I added that extra information to remember all the parent information, because I'm going to have a bunch of fragments or pieces that are going to be a list of strings of all the edge labels that I encounter along the way. I'm going to have a current node equal to the best node that I set. And then while it's the case that the current node is not equal to the root, so carry on walking, get the edge that I care about. So this is in edge of node. And we're going to have start length is equal to in edge of node. It's a tuple that represents the starting position and the length of the substring within the text that I care about. So grab the current substring, and the current substring is, well, it's text of start to start plus length. We know that. There's one little thing, which is text is not defined. Remember, it is an attribute of the tree. So I need to say tree.text. Okay, so now that's the string that I care about. And then I just need to append that to the fragments or the list of strings that I already have access to. And once I've done that, then I can say move up. Okay, so this is, once I've got the current substring, I have what I need, and then update the current node to be its parent. So that's where this extra piece of information was useful, and this extra piece of information was useful. At the end of this process, oh no, the pieces are in reverse order because I'm going backwards. So I just want to pieces.reverse it. And that'll fix that, and then I want to join them together. So I'm going to say return empty string.join of my pieces, and that should solve it. Let's see. So we've got our example here, and Python 3 LREP, not py. We're getting an index out of range. Now I know one of the things that's going to be a concern here. I'll see if this fixes it. Method object is not subscriptable. Oh no. All right. Okay, that's not good. So we'll fix that. But we did at least get a different piece of output. So there's one thing I kind of want to go ahead and do, which is in the suffix array, suffix tree, excuse me, code. Let's handle once and for all this notion of, what happens if the string didn't end in a $sign. I'm going to, in build suffix tree, I'm going to add a little bit of cleanup. So, if the user gives a string that doesn't end in $, add it. So I will say if there's a method here called ends with. So if s ends with a $, then take no action. So if, I guess it should be not s ends with $, let's do s plus equal $. That should fix that. All right, so now we're going to resolve our other issue in LREP, which is line 46. Method object is not subscriptable. Okay, so tree.children of node. Our data types. Tree.children. So that looked pretty good. All right, so far so good. Dict object is not callable on line 98. Let's fix that one. Okay, my friend is using brackets all over the place. That should be good. All right, CATAC, that's what's expected. A little bit of minor syntax stuff. Not too bad. So let's see if we can solve this. Go to the platform. Get a data set for this problem. Put it in the right place. We're going to call it dataset.txt. Oh, it already exists. Oh no. Oh no. Get rid of it. Run it again. List index out of range. Oh dear. Download the wrong data set. That's very, very likely. Yeah. Very likely I downloaded the wrong data set. Hey, there we go. Let's try that again. Okay, now we get the second answer. It'd be very tempting to copy this, but this is the answer on our sample. And that's the answer on our data set. So doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I guess I have time to explain it. He's doing a lot of work behind the scenes for this, pretty long string, and then a value of k to be equal to 18 to say what's the longest substring that occurs at least 18 times. And that'd be a lot of work, but what's nice is we've already got the suffix tree, or we could just form the suffix tree. And then it's able to very rapidly go through this. And I mean, it's almost instant. It gave us this answer. The brute force approach would be to categorize all the substrings of each length and then subsequently go up and try and find the longest ones. That might work for some small cases, but it's not going to work in general. All right, that's that problem done. One more in the books. Fortunately, the next problem is going to be quite similar. Get rid of my data sets. Let's clear out all those error messages. Clear that one out. We're going to look at MREP. All right, carrying on. All right. MREP is identifying maximal repeats. And hey, look at that. That's a word that we probably all know at this point in time, which is CRISPR. This problem was actually written by Brian Chodden before CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing was really a thing. So thank you, Brian. And in this particular case, it gets at what a CRISPR is. So probably most people who've heard of CRISPR as a gene editing system don't know that a CRISPR is a clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat, which is certainly a mouthful. But what that means is it's an interval of DNA with identical repeats kind of on the boundary that alternate with unique intervals called spacers. So here is our illustration of this, where you can see that you have these repeated regions and then differing regions within these boundaries between them. And the repeats themselves are highly palindromic because when you transcribe them, they form into this hairpin loop. And so that's why, because there's an RNA side of this that we're not really getting into. And we're not getting into the gene editing side of things either, but this is a good example of knowing kind of, how fundamental aspects of string analysis around genomes can wind up being really important in therapeutics. But what this question is asking is a question that's inspired by this system, which is, in this particular case, well, I should say, looking at our example before, again, what is the bacterium really doing? It's using these blue sequences as a way of a memory of, a past infection from a phage. And that's clever because it's kind of locking away this information between repeated information. So it's able to kind of appreciate that this is a bookmark to itself in terms of, identifying this foreign viral DNA in case it sees it again. That's clever. It's actually, it's hard not to imagine, not to see a comparison of this with like how memory works in AI, where you have a markdown file or something that the AI can always consult. So this is almost from an information perspective. It's the same kind of idea. This is like the genome, the bacterial genome's markdown file or its skill that it has access to say, oh, I've already seen this before and I can consult it, right? There's of course a huge amount of molecular machinery around that. Nevertheless, you can see that this information is storable with not that much information on the level of strings. Pretty cool. What we're looking for is repeats that cannot be extended further, because if these blue regions are different, we're looking for repeated regions that are, perhaps long, that occur multiple times. So you see the red regions occur multiple times, but they also can't really be extended further, at least uniquely across all of these connections without disagreeing. So if you try to go to the left on each of these regions, you get TGGA. And if you tried to go to the right, you get CTGC. So sometimes they agree. And in this one, for this one, you get a T. Going left here, you get a T. Sometimes they agree, but they don't always agree. And so what the question is asking us to do is first define what it is that we're really looking for, which is a maximal repeat. So it's a repeated substring of a string, call that T, that occurs at least twice, where two occurrences cannot be extended by one symbol in either direction and still agree. So you could occur 50 times, but if one of those two things, one of those 50 occurrences doesn't extend, it wouldn't work. So AG is a maximal repeat in this longer string because, well, AG could be extended left with a T and left with a T in the first two instances. It can't in the third instance. And on the right, where you go AGT, but you go AGC and AGA. So it's a maximal repeat because it occurs more than once. It occurs 3 times. And it's not the case to extend it either left or right and always get the same symbol. TAG is also a maximal repeat of this longer string. It can't be extended to the left here, so it's maximal in that direction. And then it is extended by a T in its first occurrence and a C in its second occurrence, and so forth. So what the problem is asking us to do is identify all maximal repeats of a string having at least 20, length at least 20. Now that's a hard-coded parameter, which means it sucks. We should have just given you a value of k here. And the problem should be, find all maximal repeats of a string having length at least k. And that's the problem that we're going to solve. So that's what we're actually going to return. In this particular case, it gives you these two data sets. And the question becomes, how is the suffix tree useful here? So as we move towards an idea for a solution, and we look at our suffix tree again, remember, from when we found the longest multiple repeat, that the internal nodes of the suffix tree correspond to repeated strings, repeated substrings in the string. So that's so far so good. We also have a benefit, which is, if you imagine every time you encounter an internal node, if every symbol or every initial symbol of the substrings leaving that node, if they all agreed, then you would have added it here. So if this were an A and this were an A, they would also occur here. So as a result, we know already that when you leave an internal node, that the initial symbols disagree. This is an invariant property of the suffix tree that we've already seen when we've worked with suffix trees. So that has an implication, which is this repeat CCG is what's called right maximal. It's not possible to extend it to the right any further. So we see CCG and we see CCG. It's not possible to extend it to the right and have agreement. So we see a G here and we see an A there when we try to extend it to the right. So kind of half of the problem is already solved for us. which is nice. So we know every time we're at an internal node, you can't extend, that's a repeat. It also can't be extended to the right any farther. So the internal nodes are almost exactly what we want. They're almost the maximal repeats, but they're not quite the maximal repeats. And I also want to point out one other thing is, why the term maximal is used. Maximal means can't be extended further. That's different from maximum. So this is a concept I didn't learn for a very long time in studying mathematics and optimization, which is that maximum means a global optimization of the problem. So when we solved longest repeat, that's a global optimization. We only cared about the longest one. In this particular case, we're looking for every single possible candidate that achieves some condition, which is as long as it possibly can be without being extended. That could be actually pretty short or it could be very long. It doesn't matter. All we care about is that it can't be extended in either direction and remain a repeat. So that is, in that context, we want to use the term maximal. We know that the internal nodes cannot be extended to the right any further and remain repeats. Good. What about to the left? Well, our idea then is find all the substrings corresponding to internal nodes. And then, we're going to have to do a little bit more work. So we're going to have to go through for each of these internal nodes and then ask the question, are they also left maximal? So when you identify TCCG, and you know that it occurs twice, well, don't have to look at any symbols to the right because you know that they're going to disagree at a G and an A. But you do need to look to the left. So we're then going to have to go in, identify that substring, and then try and extend it to the left one. So when you extend that to the left one, you get a G. When you extend this TCCG to the left one, you get a C. So that is indeed a left maximal substring or repeat as well. And then we just have to do that for every internal node. Here's another example. CG is a repeat. For example, it occurs here and it occurs here. Now in this case, CG, when you extend it to the left, gives you CCG and CCG. So it occurs twice, which we know because there are two leaf nodes beneath it. But this CG, unfortunately, can be extended to the left uniquely, so it's not a maximal substring. In fact, the maximal substring is this CCG that we see here. So this node works, this node does not, and actually, that node doesn't work either because when you go one more symbol, you get our friend TCCG. So you get this node. So this node gets disqualified, this node gets disqualified, this node gets disqualified. And so what we're doing is identifying all the internal nodes, figuring out which ones are left maximal also, and then retaining all of those. So it's not hard to traverse the tree and figure out, where are your internal nodes. It's not hard to traverse the tree and figure out what are the strings that end at those internal nodes. This is stuff that we've already done when we've worked with the suffix tree. What we need to do is then add that extra little layer to be able to identify for each internal node, is it left maximal? And that's what this question is really all about. So our solution then is going to be to first build the suffix tree and do a little bit of bookkeeping. So we're going to take a string S and the minimum length. And so I know I'm going to need a tree. And I'm going to have build suffix tree. And this is already imported from SUFF. And I've got a little bit of IO imported too. But so we're going to go into this SUFF problem where we've already learned how to build a suffix tree. I'm going to do so. And so you just need to take a string S as input. And then we know what the text is going to be. It's tree.text, but it's also S. So we don't need that. And then we're going to say n is equal to the length of S and root is equal to tree.root. Now the first thing we're going to do is apply BFS again so that we can walk upward in the tree. And nothing here is different from what we've done previously when we applied BFS. So we still want the same information. We want to know how far down am I? We want to know what is my parent node? We want to know what's the edge that connects me to my parent. All that's useful information that the suffix tree doesn't include by default. So I'm going to go to LREP and I'm going to get the BFS part of our code. And all of this is just going to be the same. So all of this bookkeeping here is going to be the same to generate that. And that's an indication whenever I'm copying that much code, this very well might be appropriate for a subroutine, but for now, that's all right. I'm just going to copy this code over. What this tells me is I have, a dictionary that maps each node to its parent, so ID to ID. I have a dictionary that maps each node to the edge that connects it to its parent, where that's stored as a tuple of the starting position in the string and the length of that corresponding substring. I've got the number of symbols for each node that I've spelled down from the root, which starts off as mapping root to 0. I have the order of the nodes that I've considered. What's nice about that is I know that I always consider a child of a node after I consider itself, and then the queue and the head just maintain the BFS. So this is just local to BFS, but this is information that's going to be extendable outside of the BFS. So I have my BFS loop, I perform this, and I essentially add information to the suffix tree that I wanted. And then the question becomes, for each node, get the characters preceding it by walking upward, okay, to the root. So here's where I'm going to spell out, this is useful. I need to do this to determine if it's left maximal. So the first thing I'm actually going to do then is define a dictionary. And that dictionary is going to be called preceding. And it's going to be a dictionary that maps integers, which are the node labels, to the sets of strings that they're connected to previously. And it's going to be an empty set or an empty dictionary. Then I'm going to go through all the nodes, range over nodes, moving upward. So I'm going to say for node in the reversed order. And I'm going to say, am I at a leaf? So if tree.isLeaf of the node. And if I'm at a leaf, then what I want to say is that the start of this suffix is equal to n minus the depth of the node. So I already have a depth dictionary. You couldn't think of the word dictionary. I already have a depth dictionary that stores how many symbols down I am. So if that suffix start winds up being equal to 0, well, we hit the start of the string. Okay. So if I'm at the start of the string, well, there is no, so I should say, preceding tells me the symbols occurring, and it could be just one symbol, that occur before all of the occurrences of the string that ends at the node index given as the key of the dictionary. That's a mouthful, but that's saying like it maps this key as a node to the collection of symbols that occur immediately before me. So when I walk back up to the root node, what are the symbols that occur before me and over all of those occurrences? That's useful because if this set has more than one thing in it, well, I know I'm not left maximal. Or I am left maximal. So if I hit the start of the string, well, that means I'm at the very start of the string, and it by definition, this is left maximal. But I also want to set a value of the dictionary. So I want to say preceding of node is equal to just a set that just contains a special symbol. So I'm just going to use a hashtag. And that's the easy case. Else, find the preceding symbol. And I'll say preceding of node is equal to set, which is just the text of suffix start -1. So that's where the suffix started. So remember, all this is because I'm at a leaf. And if I'm at a leaf, it means that, the string ending here is unique in the string. So this tells me exactly where I am. And then, the other case that I care about is else I'm at an internal node, and there's multiple options. And I think I used text here, and it's S. Okay. There's multiple options as I go. So if there are multiple options to go backward, the fortunate thing is I can assume, because I'm going through the reverse order, and this is something that we saw in the LREP problem, I can assume that I've already set the preceding for all of the children. Okay, so I'm going to say characters is a set of strings. It starts off as empty, and I will add each character that I see as I walk back. So I'm going to have for a child, and then I don't care about the start or the length. In tree.children of node, I want to say, check out preceding of child. So I'm range over all of the children. And the idea is if I'm at a node and I've got, 3 different children, well, what are all of their sets of preceding symbols? And they better all agree, because if they better all have a disagreement, because if they all agree, then I know I'm not left maximal. So the point becomes how to do this. And when I range over all of the children, what I want to grab is preceding of child for each of these child nodes. When I do that, though, then I want to say, well, I want to add it in to the character set, but only if I've not seen it before. So the way that I can do that is actually to say, add it to the character set with a union. So this pipe symbol says union it in, meaning if it already is in the character set, don't add it. Otherwise, we're just going to add it to the set. So that union is important. And then at the end of this process, I'm going to set preceding of the current node equal to its characters. This does a lot of work for us, because now it means that at each node, we have a preceding node set that either contains, multiple things, in which case the string ending here is left maximal, or one thing, it's not. And now we have a quick check on each of those things. So I will say repeats is a list of string, empty. And then I'm going to range over all of the nodes. I know how to do that. I'm going to say for node in the order. And then I'm going to have certain cases. So there's going to be process of elimination. If the node is equal to the root, then I want to continue. Okay. Why? Because, well, the root is not a the root node corresponds to the repeat of all the strings, so there's nothing of interest there. The other thing would be, if I'm at a leaf. Well, this can't be a repeat because I'm at a leaf. So if I'm at the root node or a leaf, there's nothing doing here. If the depth of the node that I care about, that's the number of symbols that I spell down from the root, is less than the minimum length, well, this repeat isn't long enough. So if it's not long enough, I'm going to continue in that case too. And then there's the final case that's the really interesting one, which is if I look at the preceding of node and there's more than 2 symbols in there, or less than 2 symbols, meaning there's only 1, I'm going to continue. So this is the case that, it is a repeat, but it's not left maximal. You can't extend it to the left and it be unique. So at this point in time, if I make it here, I've eliminated all the bad cases. And, what can I assume? That I'm at an internal node, good, that is not the root, that's handled by the first case. if I make it past this check, then I know that I'm deep enough, you know. So I'm at a repeat. I also know that it's long enough because its length is greater than or equal to minimum length. And I know that it's left maximal because the length of the preceding node, the number of symbols preceding me over all the possibilities, is at least equal to 2. So that's good. So that means that it's a winner, and I should add its corresponding string to the collection of repeats, because at the end of this process, I'm going to return repeats. Okay, so I declared that as my list of strings. These are the answers that I want at the end. And let's walk and solve the problem. So it's the same thing that we saw with LREP. We're going to have a bunch of fragments. And this is inside of the for loop that's looking at the current node. So this is the fragment corresponding to this current internal node. I'm going to have a walker that represents the current node. It starts at the node that we're at. And then while this walker is not equal to the root, so walk upward, grabbing all of the substrings that we encounter along the way. So we'll say start comma length is equal to in edge of the walker. That's good. That tells me what's the edge above me. And once I've got that edge above me, as we saw with LREP, I'm interested in, I keep calling it text, but it's S, of start to start plus length. That's the fragment that I care about. That's the piece that I want to append to pieces. So I'll append it to pieces. And update the walker. And that's just the parent of the current walker. Then at the end of this process, reverse the fragments and concatenate. I walk backwards, so I want to say pieces.reverse, and I want to repeats.append the join of them. So empty string.join of the pieces. So. And that should be our problem solved. So I'll run Python 3 mrep.py. That gives us an answer. Okay. Get this. And we get that. That is that one. We're getting some extra information. And that's a little troubling. A little bit troubling. Because this appears to be maximal. And that's getting a substring of it. So I don't think I should be getting 4 things here. I think I should be getting 2. So let's look. It's interesting to think that I have this occurrence and this occurrence. And that's extended 1 symbol. Exactly. This occurrence has gone 1 symbol to the left exactly. So I've found the answers, but I've got a little bit of extra. Okay. So the BFS is going to be the same. Not particularly worried there. This is good. Maps, dictionaries, and sets. That's the same. I definitely want to range over the nodes in reverse order. I'm going to make this check. I would greatly doubt that this is any issue here, because we should be handling leaves. Otherwise, we would be getting some really weird stuff going on. And what I should do is actually just draw this suffix tree and take a look at it. It's a good check. It's equal to the root. It's a good check too. So we'll see that printed 4 times, I believe. Definitely less than 2 or equal to 1. This just other little case where it's concluding that that's left maximal. It's not the case at all. See a 2 just before it. Same thing for this. This occurs here with an A, here with an A, here with an A, here with an A. So that really should have gotten grabbed by that. I think this makes a difference. Fix that. Oh my goodness. That fixed it. I have to sit with this one for a while. Yeah, don't know. Do not know why that needed the extra $sign. Okay. Not worth considering. Let me know what I did. Feel free. Feel free. Doesn't matter for now. Point is, the algorithm itself is fine. Weird. And let's go to the platform then. Download something. Call it data set. Add it. Wrong answer. Okay, good. Naturally. Probably needed a $sign on the end. Should have asked that. Okay, let me just figure this out. All right. Maybe I used the wrong thing here. So if s of length of s minus 1 is not equal to a $sign, add the $sign to it. Okay, and then let's go back, comment this out, let's see it again. And that works on the test. Okay, so I just, it's some dumb Python thing and it giving you a million ways of doing it. It's just, I'm blaming it all on Python. This is just the standard way of doing it. I tried to get fancy. There's no reason to do that. And now it's going to work. So it's 100% Python's fault. Let's try it again. And one more time. Sorry, wrong answer. At this point, I'm probably just adding the wrong data sets. But bad sign here. It's a bad sign. It looks like the same thing is happening. GTCG. And see, this has an extra A on the end. So now it's going to the right. Oh, man. confident in this. Just got too many solutions. Like, so we know that part is working. This part of the code. So it's related to this this $, because when we fixed it in one place, we fixed it here by adding the $. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have the $, there. That's good. But it should have the $. It should have the $, when we build it. Oh, God. This is one of the nastiest things I've ever seen. This is just disgusting, because we build the suffix tree based on S, but remember that when we do that, some of the time we add a symbol to it. And that's definitely the case for, remember, it's working for the sample when I added the $. But it's actually still not, watch what happens. It still doesn't work on the sample. It's amazing. It still doesn't work on the sample when I remove the $, from S. And you're going to be like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because I know we're 100% certain. We're 100% certain we don't need to print this anymore. Get rid of this. We're 100% certain that, oh goodness. Line 137. Okay. Indentation issues. Thank you, Python. I appreciate that. Just what I needed. Okay. Notice that this is the wrong answer again. So this is on our sample where we said there's only 2. And we're getting 4. Now that's weird, because I know for a fact, I thought it was this ends with thing, that in suffix.py, that we fixed it, because we said, well, we add a $, right? And then that we know that when we do that, it's adding the $. But when I add the $, before I pass it into the function, then it doesn't work. Now, this I'm 100% certain is adding the $. So then that's very weird. Why is it that if the $, is given to build suffix tree as the final symbol of the string, it works, but if we just pass it in, it doesn't work. So that really is what we should be looking at, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. Before, I thought it had to do with the syntax of this thing and the fact that Python gives you a million ways of solving one problem for no reason. But this is a problem, right? And why on earth would it be a problem? That if I change this to this, the string is going to be the same. And it must be related to this particular S in the string. In this problem, it doesn't have anything to do with the suffix, because the suffix tree is made correctly. We could figure that out, but the point becomes there's only one place. There's only one place that has anything to do with the string manipulation in this problem. It is the most innocuous looking nonsense ever, which is that if I pass in a string that doesn't have a dollar sign when I build the suffix tree, that S behind the scenes gets one extra symbol. So if S doesn't have the dollar sign, it gets one more symbol. And the problem is S is still S without the dollar sign. So if I say n equal length of S, n is one symbol too short. So it's not length of S, it's length of tree.text. It's as simple as that. And what I need to do is say text equals tree.text. And this seems like such a nonsense little thing. Like, why not just use S? And it's because S might have had a dollar sign appended to it. So now the text that I actually care about is tree.text. And so I need to say n is the length of that text. So it might be S, it might have this extra symbol. And anytime I look at S, so this is, anytime I'm accessing like S of something, I need to access tree of something. And that's just nasty. That's absolutely nasty. Because it's the type of bug that seems like it's somewhere else. And it's not. So I think that was all the occurrences. Oh, of course, not subscriptable. Tree of suffix. Why did I say tree? I'm just on tilt now. Okay, try that again. It should be text. I did it again. Tree of text of. I mean, it is a tree. That's the text I care about. All right, and now we're at 2. So now we're at 2 on that. And when I go to main, if I take this dollar sign out, I should get just 2. And we get just 2. So then if I uncomment this out, get rid of it. Oh, it already exists, does it? It went to output. Okay, that looks like a lot fewer occurrences than what we saw before. It sure does. It sure does. It's not immediately wrong. It's probably a good thing. All right, we made it through. We made it through. 99% of that was great. And that last 1% was annoying. That's the importance of testing. And frankly, like, why this platform can be not the best for beginners, because that's just absolutely disgusting. And it's the critical importance of moving towards devising a larger test suite, testing all of your functions. And it's the type of stuff, honestly, big picture, that I have tried to teach students to do for a long time when we have better auto graders that are a little more mature here. And try to encourage them to go through that process in their code. So I wasn't going to just detour and write a testing suite for every single one of our functions. We're just trying to hit the high spots there. But yeah, that's why it's so important. And that's the benefit of AI, because AI will help you build out tests and, make sure that your code appears to be working. You still need to apply the human intelligence to it, but it's a huge part of what programming is. Okay, that's it. We've got one more question to do. It's going to be ITWV. I'll cover it here momentarily. And it's a short one. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. It is a short one. All right. I like we have concurrence and no chat. So I'm just here sweating it out alone. All the concurrence are just like loving watching this. Just silently watching me fail. Okay. One more today, and then we'll call it a day there. It's a fun problem too. And I'm going to get it right on the first go. So sadists are not welcome. ITWV is finding disjoint motifs in a gene. And there is an attempt to motivate this biologically. We have looked at a previous problem, I think it was SCSP, that took two strings and wanted to find the shortest possible string that contains both of them. This problem is a variant on this. It's like a classic LEET code style question. It's more of a fun problem than it is a biologically appropriate one. But the idea is if you have two strings, they can be interwoven into a longer string if there's some substring of that longer string that contains these two strings as disjoint subsequences that is completely made up of those symbols. So for example, if S is this longer string and T is ACHE and U is CCG, then this substring contains only symbols from T and U. They're not duplicated. Each symbol is assigned to one of T and U, and the order is preserved. So you see ACAG in there, you see CCG in there. So the length is 7 of this substring. That's something that would have to be invariant because that's the combined lengths of T and U. This is not considered to be a hit though. Why? Because, well, they are disjoint subsequences. ACAG is the blue sequences and CCG are the red sequences. But for this substring, there are a bunch of intermediate symbols. So they have to be disjoint subsequences of the substring of S, and they have to constitute the only sequences, the only symbols in that substring. Another example would be ACACG. That's great. That contains ACAG, and it contains, I want to go backwards, and it contains CCG as well. But, get rid of that. Oh, that's a nice little bug there. It contains ACAG and it contains CCG, but it doesn't have length 7. So some of those symbols are reused. So the idea of this question then is I've got a DNA string. And what I want to do is I actually have, that's going to be my S. And then I have a bunch of DNA strings. So we could have just given you a T and a U and said, is it the case that you can interweave them? But what we're going to give you is a bunch of strings. So this is my longest string. And then a bunch of shorter strings. And then the matrix is going to compare them all. So they're going to say, can you interweave ACAG and GT? And that's what corresponds to this element. Can you interweave GT and CCG? That corresponds to this element and this element. Can you interweave CCG in itself? So that would be that element. Can you interweave ACAG in itself? You cannot, but you can interweave GT in itself. So here, that's a substring of S that interweaves GT and GT. That's nice. So that element is a 1, 2. This is a great problem from Jones and Pevsner classic book, problem 6.31. Really good. So we borrow it from there and make an autograder around it. And you might wonder, why is it in this bioinformatics algorithms book? It's not tremendously applicable to bioinformatics, but it really is, because the idea is, well, we're doing n by n comparisons, and we're going to do those independently. But dynamic programming is going to be lurking around the corner. So this doesn't seem like a dynamic programming problem at first glance, but it very much is. Hold on to that thought for a moment, and then I will show how to solve it. The matrix question that I want to solve, this highest level function is very easy. So I want to say, how many patterns do I have? That's n. I want to form my matrix, and I can do that in a variety of ways. So I'm going to do it in my way that doesn't require comprehension, just by saying it's a two-dimensional list of integers. Starts off as empty. I keep getting my parentheses backwards. And once I've declared that, then I'll say, well, range over n, and append to the matrix the current row. So the current row is just a bunch of zeros. So we now have a square by square matrix. So make a square matrix of zeros. That's our default value. And then range over all pairs and assign their values. So I'll say for jn range of n, for kn range of n, except I'm going to apply a trick that I've used previously because this matrix is going to be symmetric. The distance, or the value for sequences j and k, is going to be the same as the value for k and j. If you can interweave them one way, you can do it the other. And so I'm going to start this then at j. I do want to consider a string with itself, so I'm not going to do j plus 1. I'm going to do j. And then I want to say, is it the case that you can interweave them in? I'm going to have a subroutine called can interweave that takes s, it takes t, in this case t is patterns of j, and it takes u, which is patterns of k. If that's the case, then I want to set matrix of j of k equal to 1. And by symmetry, I want to set matrix of k of j equal to 1. And then I want to return the matrix. So we just need to write can interweave. And it takes s, t, and u. And it answers the question, can you interweave t and u into s? We know what we're looking for. So the target length of our substring needs to be the length of t plus the length of u. And we also know what the symbols are. So the symbols that I care about, I'm going to call that combined, is let's join t plus u together, but I want to grab all of the sorted symbols, t plus u. Okay, so this is a sorted concatenated string. And that's going to be useful because it's going to allow me to make a very quick check. So range over all substrings of s of the appropriate length. So it needs to be having the target length. So I'll say for all start positions in range starting at 0, not going to length of s, but going to length of s minus the target length plus 1. This is our magic formula in computational biology, that you have n minus k plus 1 substrings of length k of a string of length n. And then for all those starting positions, the current window is, well, the substring of s starting at the start position, going through to the target length. And then we're going to have some quick checks. Or really a quick check. So we know that the window has the right length, which is if it's the case that when you do the same thing, which is sort the current window, and that's not equal to the combined symbol, well, you know that this can't be a match. So it has to have the right symbols. And those are the symbols of t and the symbols of u. So that's a very fast answer, and that will just make our algorithm faster. So it's not going to necessarily need to apply the engine of the algorithm. And so the engine of the algorithm now is to say, at this point in time, most windows are not going to survive that. And if it does survive it, then I'm going to make a more deliberate check. And I'm going to pass that to a subroutine. So I'm going to say, if window is shuffle, window, so it's the current window, T and U. So I'm only looking at this particular substring of S. If that's the case, I'm going to return true. If I make it here, I'm going to return false, and that's our default. So none of this is complicated, right? The only thing that we need to do then is write window is shuffle, which is a much simpler question than where we started. We started with n sequences. Now we're down to one sequence, or two, excuse me, so a pair. And we started with S, and now we're down to just a window of S. So is this current window of S like an interleaving of T and U? And here's where the beauty of the problem arises, because our idea is going to be based off of dynamic programming. So in order to have dynamic programming, we must have a recurrence relation, which means that we must be able to write out what is it that we actually care about. And what we care about is something called, I'm going to call it reach of ij. And I'm just going to define it as equal to true if there's a valid coloring of the first I plus j symbols of the window that uses first I symbols of T, that's our first string, and the first J symbols of U. And false otherwise. That's a very long comment. So by coloring, I mean an assignment to say, remember, this symbol comes from T, this symbol comes from U. So we're going to use red or blue, right? And the recurrence here is where the beauty is. So the recurrence says there's two ways for reach of ij to be true. And I should say, before I even get to the recurrence, why do I care about reach of ij? Because, well, the answer that I care about is reach of, well, the length of T and the length of U. So if there's a valid coloring of the first, all the symbols, so all the symbols of window, that uses the first length of T symbols of T and the first length of U symbols of U, and then we return true. So at the end of this process, I'm going to return reach of length of T, length of U. I haven't defined reach yet, but I know that that's what I'm going to return. That's in other words, for this particular answer, this is like a sequence alignment question. We're looking for the bottom right value. It's the same thing we've always been doing. That only works, of course, if there is a valid recurrence. And the recurrence relation is beautiful for this question. And that's why there's two ways for this reach to be true. You know, way one is if reach of I minus 1j is true, and the window of I plus j minus 1 is equal to T of I minus 1. So it's been possible to get almost up to this point by saying we have I minus 1 plus j symbols that there is a valid coloring of that uses the first I minus 1 symbols of T and the first j symbols of U. Great. So this is just saying extend this by one symbol. And here's where, of course, right? Like I'm not trying to solve the entire problem, but I can build it up slowly. And so if it's the case that this next symbol matches the current symbol of the window, great. Then I can continue extending this. And the other option is, well, I would be able to extend a current victory. So reach of I, j minus 1 is true. And the window at the current position, I plus j minus 1, is equal to, well, the corresponding symbol of U. So if either of those two things, they could both be true, doesn't matter. But if either of those two things is true, then I'm going to be able to extend. So either means take the or of these two statements. And now we're ready to set things up. So the setup is the number of rows is equal to the length of T plus 1. We can see that too because, well, by how it's defined, we're going to have zero-based indexing, but we're going to have a 0 row and a 0 column. We haven't considered any symbols yet, and it's just like sequence alignment again. So the bottom right element is going to be one element more than what we thought. Notice by how I've defined this, reach of ij uses the first I symbols of T and J symbols of U. So it really would need to use all the symbols of T and all the symbols of U. So we need this bottom right element here. So calls is going to be length of U plus 1. And then I'm going to define reach. Reach is just a list of bools. So it's a two-dimensional list of bools. And everybody can start off with false, just by default. And then we'll set values to true if they deserve it. So for I in range over the rows, I'm going to say reach.append false times number of calls. And I'm also going to set one default value. Otherwise, the whole thing's going to fall apart because everybody is false. So that first value is reach of 0, 0. So the top left corner has to be true, and that makes sense. In any string, it's going to be possible to take the first 0 symbols of t and the first 0 symbols of u and interleave them because you haven't used any symbols yet. So I'm going to set the first top left element to true. Everybody else is indeed going to be false, and now we can apply the range. Now we range over all the rows and columns and apply dynamic programming. So I'll say for I in range over the rows, and then for j in range over the calls. If you're in the first element, you've already set it. So I've already set that. I could set it now again, but if I equals 0 and j equal to 0, then I'm just going to continue. Say, or set it again, but that's redundant. And otherwise, I'm going to say, well, the current position is I plus j minus 1. So that's, maybe is that necessary? Let's just not even bother with that. I'm just going to say from t is equal to, is it the case that t of I minus 1, so here's where we look at our first case here, is that equal to this? I'm just going to copy that down. And this, reach of I minus 1j. So I'll keep them in the same order. Now that we've set that, that's our from t. And now we're also going to have a from u. And it's the other two things that we care about. It's still reach of something, but it's reach of I, j minus 1. And the and is going to be the same, except in this particular case, I'm going to look at u of j minus 1. And then I want to say, well, reach of ij is just the or of these two things. So just a little bit of logic manipulation. It's nice because it's dynamic programming, but it's dynamic programming with Boolean variables, which is cool. There's just one more little thing, which is that the initial row and column of this thing are really annoying. So we want you to think about what would happen if I is equal to 0, but j is positive. Well, that would mean that I've used j symbols of u, but 0 symbols of t. And in that particular case, I really only want to set this for values that are positive. So in this particular case, yeah. And in this case, that would be all right. But the concern would be when I access this, we're going to get something out of range. So it has to be the case, we want to be very careful. If I is equal to 0 here, which it very much could be, you want to be careful about this and this access because these are just going to be out of range. So this is only valid if I is greater than 0, and we're going to add an and there, and technically it's basically this, but it's going to short circuit. So if it's not the case, if I is equal to 0, then we're never going to make this check, and that's going to preserve us from that. And similarly here, what's the bad thing that could happen? J could be equal to 0. So I'm going to say j is greater than 0 and then I'm going to parenthesize everything around there. And then I'm going to take the or of the two things. So it's still just this, but I added a little bit to it. All right, that's it for that. And the problem is really solved. That's the beauty of dynamic programming. It's nice and tight. Just care about that value. I can run Python 3 ITWV.py. This is going to run it on the sample. That gives me the same answer that I had on the platform, which is good. And so I should be able to download the data set and move it over. uncomment out. Parsing part. And problem solved. Not quite as much drama as our last one. Apart from all the dust I'm inhaling, but that's another matter. All right. That's it for today. Ooh, we had the most disastrous bug of all. The good news is we're almost through all of our streams. So our finish line is close. If we look at our list view, we've solved so many questions here. And there are, they almost fit on one page here. So there's a little bit more to do, but really just a few streams left. So I'm excited about doing it. Been a lot of fun to come back to a lot of these problems and either love them or sometimes be a little bit frustrated with them. But yeah, what is left? There's some more. There's some proteomics questions. There's some more genetics-based questions and a little bit of probability and statistics. There's a little bit more about trees and phylogenies, and everything's like quite practical. There's some classic stuff like Wright-Fisher and genetic drift and fun stuff like that. But all that's the topic, subject of another day. I hope you have a great weekend. That's it for me. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Join our mailing list, join our Discord. Please like and subscribe, drop us a comment. All that good stuff keeps us visible. And thank you for joining. I'll see you next time.